He abandoned his wife without a shred of remorse, trading her in for a young millionaire heiress who promised him a life of luxury and power. He felt unstoppable, convinced he had made the best decision of his life, but what he never imagined was that destiny had prepared a lesson that would mark him forever. While he fell into ruin, the woman he despised would rise like a phoenix, and when their paths crossed again, he discovered a truth that completely destroyed him. Do you want to know what happened? Don't look away from this story full of emotions and unexpected twists. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. Let's begin. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the scent of toasted bread in the small apartment kitchen. It was just another morning, just another routine. Sarah moved between the coffee maker and the table with the habit of someone who has been repeating the same gestures, the same rituals, for years. She poured 2 cups, placing one in front of Ethan as she did every day. He was sitting at the table, his eyes glued to his smartphone, scrolling through the screen with a furrowed brow. He barely noticed Sarah's presence when she set the mug down in front of him. "Your coffee," she said with a small smile, hoping for at least a gesture of gratitude. Ethan took it without looking up. He took a sip and pursed his lips. "You put too much sugar in it." Sarah blinked and let out a faint sigh. "I made it the way I always do." He didn't answer. He simply set the mug back on the table as if it were an insignificant detail, something of no importance. Lately, everything seemed to lack importance to him. His attitude had changed months ago. He no longer looked at her like before, no longer spoke to her with sweetness, no longer held her hand for no reason. Their conversations had become cold, distant, filled with uncomfortable silences. Sarah had tried hard to ignore it. She told herself it was just a phase, that maybe it was stress, that things would improve with time. But in the deepest part of her heart, a latent anguish told her something was wrong. She noticed it in the way he groomed himself with more care before leaving for work, in the expensive cologne he now wore, in the new suits he had bought without even consulting her. She noticed it on the nights he arrived late without a clear explanation, in the messages he checked with a smile on his lips only to delete them quickly. That day, like so many others, Ethan finished his coffee halfway and stood up. "I'll be late today," he said with indifference as he adjusted the watch on his wrist. Sarah felt a small chill. "Again?" she asked cautiously. "Lately, you're late almost every day." He continued adjusting his shirt in front of the mirror without even turning to look at her. "Work stuff. Don't wait up." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Ethan, there's something you're not telling me." For the first time in the entire conversation, he stopped. He didn't answer immediately, as if deciding whether it was worth saying what he was about to say. Then, with a heavy sigh, he put his phone on the table and looked directly at her. "Look, Sarah, I don't want this life anymore." The coffee cup in Sarah's hand trembled slightly. "What are you saying?" He crossed his arms and looked at her with an impatient expression. "I'm tired of this tiny apartment, of the routine, of living paycheck to paycheck. We've been here for years and we haven't moved forward at all. I want more." Sarah felt a blow to her chest. "More?" "Yes." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "You keep on with the same old illusions. With your pies, your bakery job, believing that someday something will change. But nothing changes, Sarah. We aren't going anywhere." The air became thick. Sarah looked at him, her heart pounding. "I thought we were happy." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Maybe you were, but I'm not. I want success, money, opportunities. And the truth, Sarah, is that you don't fit into the life I want." The words pierced her like a knife. She felt the floor give way beneath her feet. "Are you leaving me?" Ethan didn't look away for a second. "Yes." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "Why?" He grabbed his suitcase, which was already packed by the door. "Because there's someone else." The air left her lungs. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Sarah felt her legs tremble but managed to maintain her composure. "Someone else?" Ethan nodded. "Chloe Kensington." The name landed like a solid punch to her chest. "Who is she?" Ethan smiled as if the simple fact of mentioning her filled him with satisfaction. "She's an incredible woman, young, beautiful, and wealthy. Old money. Her family is influential. She has contacts, opportunities. With her, my life will be different." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. How long have you been seeing her? A few months. The frankness of his answer was like a slap in the face. Sarah felt her entire body tense up. So, all this time you've been cheating on me? He made no effort to deny it. Things weren't working between us anymore. Sarah felt a stinging behind her eyes. She didn't want to cry, not in front of him. And what am I supposed to do now? Ethan shrugged. That's not my problem anymore. Sarah's stomach twisted. She brought a hand to her chest, trying to contain the pain that was suffocating her. And then, as if he hadn't been cruel enough, Ethan dropped a set of keys on the table. Oh, and the lease for the apartment is in your name. From now on, you handle the rent. Sarah felt something inside her break completely. You're leaving me with the entire burden of the rent? I spoke to the landlord since we rented it together. I took my name off the lease starting this month. You pay it. It was too much. He wasn't just leaving her for another woman. He wasn't just abandoning her without a shred of remorse. He was also forcing her to carry a responsibility he no longer wanted. Sarah felt the tears fighting to escape, but she pressed her lips together tightly. I can't believe it. Ethan took the suitcase with hurtful tranquility. I hope you can manage, Sarah. But being honest, he turned toward the door and gave her one last look. You'll never stop being what you are, a simple baker. And with those words, he walked out the door, closing it firmly behind him. The sound of the slam resonated in the apartment like a hollow echo, like the end of something irretrievable. Sarah stayed there, standing, feeling her entire world crumble around her. The silence was the worst part because, in it, she understood that she was completely alone. The tears fell uncontrollably. She covered her face with her hands and let out a heartbreaking sob. Everything was over. The sound of the door closing behind Ethan still echoed in Sarah's mind, even days after his departure. The first night without him was the hardest. The apartment felt enormous in its solitude. Every corner reminded her of his presence. The coffee mug he always left half empty, the side of the bed that was now untouched, the echo of silence where there used to be arguments, laughter, or at least something. But Ethan was gone, and she had to keep going. The first blow came with the reality of the rent. She knew she couldn't sustain it alone for long. Despite her job at the bakery, her wages weren't enough to pay for that apartment without making sacrifices that would lead her to ruin, so she had no choice. With the little money she had saved, she looked for a cheaper place to start over. After touring various neighborhoods and rejecting places that seemed too small, too old, or simply too depressing, she found one that, although modest, seemed cozy. A small studio apartment with peeling paint and old furniture, but with enough space for her bed and a kitchen where, with some effort, she could feel at home. Moving day was tough. She didn't have many belongings, but every box she packed carried the weight of memories. Packing her clothes into a suitcase was easy. The hard part was collecting the small details of her life with Ethan. Their wedding photo, which ended up buried at the bottom of a box without her daring to look at it. The books they had bought together that now seemed foreign. The plates that had once served dinners for two and now stacked up lonely. When she arrived at her new home, she felt the emptiness more than ever, and no matter how much she tried to convince herself that she was okay, that sooner or later she would get over this, in that moment, she only felt that she had lost everything. Despite the pain, Sarah couldn't afford to stop. Every morning she forced herself to get up early, as she always did. She put on her uniform, drank a quick coffee, and headed to the bakery. The commute to work, which she used to do in a rush, she now traveled with a lost gaze, feeling that every step brought her closer to a routine that had ceased to make sense. Her job had always been a refuge, a place where she could be herself, where her love for baking gave her a purpose. But now, she simply didn't feel like doing anything. She felt extinguished, as if she were on autopilot. Jessica, her best friend and coworker, noticed the change in her from the first day. "Sarah," she said softly, while watching her mix the flour listlessly, "you can't go on like this. He didn't deserve you." "And," Jessica insisted, leaning on the table in front of her, "a man who abandons you like that, without looking back, doesn't deserve a single one of your tears." Sarah sketched a sad smile. "It's not just Ethan," she murmured. "It's everything. It's starting from zero. It's feeling like everything I built was for nothing." Jessica crossed her arms and sighed. "What you built is still here, Sarah. You're talented, You're strong. You just need to see it." But Sarah didn't see it, because at that moment, she didn't believe there was anything left in her worthy of being rescued. Days passed, and the routine continued, though Sarah couldn't help but feel empty. Until one day, something changed. She was behind the counter arranging fresh pies that had just come out of the oven when she saw Mrs. Higgins enter, a regular customer of the bakery. She was an elderly woman with a kind face and a tender smile who came every week to buy pastries for her family. She always ordered the same thing, a large strawberry cream tart and a chocolate one for her grandkids. But Sarah had noticed a detail that no one else seemed to see. Every time she picked up her order, Mrs. Higgins looked at the desserts with a melancholic expression, as if she wanted to enjoy them but knew she couldn't. That day, as the elderly woman took out her coin purse to pay, Sarah couldn't help but ask, "Mrs. Higgins, why do you never buy anything for yourself?" The woman looked up with a resigned smile. "Oh, dear," she said sweetly, "I can't eat sugar. I'm diabetic." Sarah felt a knot in her chest. She came every week, bought desserts for her family, but never for herself. And yet, she always looked at the pies with that nostalgic glint in her eyes, as if remembering the times when she could enjoy a sweet treat without worry. Sarah felt an impulse, a spark she hadn't felt in weeks. "What if I make one for you?" Mrs. Higgins looked at her with surprise. "What did you say, dear?" "A tart," Sarah repeated with enthusiasm. "Sugar-free. So you can enjoy it too." The elderly woman blinked several times before letting out a soft laugh. "That would be wonderful. But can it be done?" "Of course, we just have to find the perfect recipe." For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt something move inside her. Mrs. Higgins took her bag and prepared to leave. "You're a good girl, Sarah," she said with gratitude. "Not many people think of others that way." Sarah watched the woman leave the bakery and stood in silence, her mind elsewhere. Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe there was still something inside her worth the effort. Her routine went on like any other day, serving customers, taking orders, cleaning trays, and making sure everything was in its place. But inside, something had changed since her conversation with Mrs. Higgins. The idea of creating a sugar-free tart hadn't left her for a single instant. Every time she served a person, every time she sold a cake, she couldn't help but think of all the people who, like the elderly woman, couldn't enjoy these desserts. How many more customers had passed through this bakery with the same frustrated desire? How many had looked at the sweets with longing, only to remember they couldn't eat them? Sarah knew she had to do something. Taking advantage of a quiet moment between orders, she approached Mr. Miller, the owner of the bakery. He was a man in his 60s, robust and of few words, with gray hair always covered by a chef's hat. He was checking inventory in the back room when she caught his attention. "Mr. Miller, do you have a minute?" she asked with a mix of nerves and determination. He looked up from his papers and eyed her with curiosity. "Tell me, Sarah." She took a breath and gathered her courage. "I've been thinking. Why don't we add a line of sugar-free tarts to the menu? Something for people who can't consume traditional sweets, like Mrs. Higgins." Mr. Miller furrowed his brow and crossed his arms. "Sugar-free tarts?" "Yes," she nodded. "Yesterday Mrs. Higgins told me she always buys desserts for her family but never for herself. It made me think there must be many other people in the same situation. If we offered an option for diabetics, we could help more customers." The man snorted, weighing the idea for a few seconds. Then he shook his head with an expression of skepticism. "Look, Sarah, I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but do you really think it would sell? People come here looking for the classic flavors. I don't know if something like that would catch their attention." Sarah felt a pang of disappointment but didn't give up. "We could try with just one tart," she insisted. "If customers ask for it, then we could make more." But Mr. Miller had already made a decision. "I don't want to risk it with something I don't know will work," he responded firmly. "We already have our established products. I don't see a need to change something that gives us good results." Sarah lowered her gaze, feeling her enthusiasm deflate. "I understand." Mr. Miller observed her for a moment and, with a less severe tone, added, "If you want to try it on your own, go ahead, but on your own time." Sarah nodded, grateful at least for that small concession. And as the day progressed, her initial frustration began to transform into something stronger. If the bakery owner didn't want to take the risk, she would. Not to sell the tart, not to prove anything to anyone, but because Mrs. Higgins deserved to enjoy something made especially for her at least once. That night, after a long workday, Sarah arrived at her small apartment with only one thing in mind. She turned on the kitchen light and dropped her bag on the table, feeling for the first time in weeks a true motivation. Her tiny kitchen wasn't the best equipped, but it had the essentials: an old mixer, some worn molds, and a small pantry where she kept the ingredients she had bought on the way home. She took a notebook and began writing ingredient combinations. She needed to find the perfect recipe. She didn't want the tart to have an artificial or bland taste. She didn't want it to be one of those diet versions that sacrificed flavor for the lack of sugar. She wanted it to taste like a real tart. She tied her hair back in a ponytail, rolled up her sleeves, and with a mix of excitement and determination, began to work. The first attempt was a disaster. The dough was too hard, as if she had forgotten a key ingredient. The second attempt wasn't better. The filling separated, and the texture became grainy. Sarah sighed and leaned against the table, observing the mess around her. Flour everywhere, spoons and bowls piled in the sink, the counter covered in sticky dough remnants. The clock on the wall marked almost midnight, and her body was beginning to feel the exhaustion. Common sense told her she should give up for today, that she could try tomorrow. But her heart said otherwise. She thought of Mrs. Higgins' smile, the hope in her eyes when she mentioned the idea of a sugar-free dessert, and she knew she couldn't stop there. She couldn't fail her. She took a deep breath and started again. This time she was more meticulous. She adjusted the proportions of the ingredients, let the dough rest longer, tried a different sweetener, and made sure the mixture had the perfect texture before putting it in the oven. When the aroma of the tart began to permeate the kitchen, she felt a slight flutter in her stomach. Something told her that this time she was closer. She waited patiently, and when she finally took it out of the oven, she let it cool a bit before cutting a small piece and tasting it. The flavor exploded in her mouth, and for the first time all night, she smiled. She had done it. The texture was smooth, the sweetness balanced. There were no traces of that artificial aftertaste she feared so much. It was a real tart. She placed it carefully in a container, making sure it remained well protected. She looked at the clock and saw it was past 2 a.m. Her eyes burned with sleep, and her body begged for rest. But inside, something felt different. For the first time in a long time, she felt she had done something that really mattered. The next day, she would take that tart to the bakery. And when Mrs. Higgins tasted it, she would know that all that effort had been worth it. The sound of the alarm clock broke the silence of Sarah's small apartment. She opened her eyes with difficulty, feeling the weight of exhaustion in her body. The night before had been long, but despite the fatigue, a sensation of satisfaction invaded her. She lay there for a few seconds, remembering the exact moment she tasted the last version of the tart. Every failed attempt had been worth it. She turned her head and looked toward the kitchen table. There, inside a carefully covered container, was the tart she had prepared for Mrs. Higgins. The golden, shiny surface highlighted the pieces of fresh strawberries arranged delicately on top, creating a beautiful contrast with the cream she had prepared with such care. She sat up slowly and approached to observe it better. Its aroma was sweet, enveloping, with a subtle touch of vanilla and almonds. She felt proud. For the first time in a long time, she felt she had done something truly meaningful. Still in her pajamas, she took out her phone and took a photo. She wanted to remember this moment. It wasn't just a sugar-free tart. It was proof that she could still make something beautiful. She smiled to herself and got ready for the day. When she arrived at the bakery, Jessica was already in the kitchen organizing ingredients for the day. Sarah entered with her bag pressed against her chest, feeling a strange mix of excitement and nerves. What if the tart wasn't what she expected? What if Mrs. Higgins didn't enjoy it as much as she imagined? But as soon as she saw her friend, she knew she couldn't keep it to herself. "Jess," she called out with enthusiasm. Jessica, who was cutting a stick of butter, looked up with curiosity. "Why so cheerful so early?" she asked with a smile. Sarah took the container out of her bag carefully and placed it on the table. "You have to see this." Jessica wiped her hands on her apron and approached with interest. When Sarah uncovered the tart, her eyes opened wide with astonishment. "Oh my God, Sarah," she exclaimed. "It's gorgeous." The red, juicy strawberries stood out against the white, shiny cream, and the golden crust had a perfect finish. Jessica observed it closer, and then looked at Sarah with admiration. "You made this?" Sarah nodded shyly. "Yes. It's for Mrs. Higgins." Jessica blinked, surprised. "For Mrs. Higgins?" "Yes. Yesterday she told me she can't eat sugar, and I thought it would be nice to make something special for her." Jessica looked back at the tart, now with an expression of tenderness. "Girl, this is beautiful." Sarah smiled shyly. "Do you think she'll like it?" Jessica took a fingerful of cream with curiosity and tasted it. As soon as the flavor melted in her mouth, her eyes lit up. "This is incredible," she exclaimed. "It tastes like a normal tart." Sarah felt a flutter in her chest. "Really?" "Of course. If you hadn't told me, I never would have guessed it has no sugar." Sarah let out a sigh of relief. Jessica gave her a small nudge on the shoulder. "Mrs. Higgins is going to go crazy over this." Sarah smiled, feeling her confidence grow little by little. "I hope so." The day advanced with the usual routine. Customers entering and leaving, fresh bread filling the air with its warm aroma, the sound of the cash register accompanying the murmur of conversations. But Sarah could barely concentrate. Every time the doorbell chimed, her heart beat faster. And then, finally, she arrived. Mrs. Higgins entered with her slow gait, her purse held tight on her arm, and the kind smile that always characterized her. Sarah felt a wave of emotion run through her body. She took a deep breath, grabbed the container with the tart, and approached the counter. "Mrs. Higgins!" she called with enthusiasm. The elderly woman looked at her with surprise. "Good morning, dear." Sarah smiled and extended the container to her with both hands. "This is for you." Mrs. Higgins frowned with curiosity and looked at the tart through the clear lid. Her lips parted in astonishment. "For me?" "Yes," Sarah said shyly. "Yesterday you told me you can't eat sugar, so I wanted to prepare something special." Mrs. Higgins opened the container carefully, and her eyes shone upon seeing the tart. "But what a beautiful thing!" Jessica, who was behind the counter, approached with a big smile. "Isn't it perfect, Mrs. Higgins?" The elderly woman touched the edge of the crust delicately, as if she didn't want to ruin the moment. "I hope you like it." Mrs. Higgins looked up and took Sarah's hand gently. "Dear, it doesn't matter how it tastes. Just the fact that you did this for me is already the best gift." Sarah smiled, feeling a deep warmth in her chest. Mrs. Higgins brought the first bite to her mouth with the same delicacy a mother would taste food made by her child. Sarah felt the tension accumulate in her chest, as if every muscle in her body had frozen the instant the fork touched the elderly woman's lips. Jessica, beside her, held her breath, eyes fixed on Mrs. Higgins' reaction. For a moment, everything stopped. The elderly woman chewed slowly, letting the flavor dissolve in her mouth. Her face, which at first showed curiosity, gradually changed to an expression of surprise, then to one of genuine joy. Her eyes opened a little wider, as if she couldn't believe what she was tasting. "Oh my God," she whispered, bringing a hand to her chest. "I can't believe it." Sarah felt a knot in her throat. "Is it okay?" Mrs. Higgins looked at her and nodded, eyes moist with an emotion that went beyond the simple pleasure of eating. "It's been years since I tasted something like this. I thought I'd never enjoy a tart again without worrying." Jessica gently punched Sarah's arm with a triumphant smile. "I told you. I knew it would be perfect." Sarah let out the air she had been holding, and a shaky smile appeared on her face. All the fatigue from the night before, all the failed tests, every ounce of frustration, it had all been worth it. Mrs. Higgins cut another piece with more enthusiasm and brought it to her mouth again, savoring it with closed eyes. "It doesn't have that artificial taste sugar-free desserts usually have. It doesn't taste like restriction. It tastes like happiness." Sarah felt a comforting heat expand in her chest. "That was the idea," she said shyly. "I didn't want it to be a diet version. I wanted it to be real." The elderly woman put the fork down on the saucer and took Sarah's hands in hers with a gesture full of tenderness. "Dear, you didn't just manage to make a sugar-free tart. You managed to bring me a little piece of my past." Sarah felt a slight stinging in her eyes but blinked quickly to hold back the tears. There was no greater reward than seeing Mrs. Higgins happy. Jessica, who had been watching everything with a grin from ear to ear, took out her phone and raised it toward the table. Let's see. This has to be shared." "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, amused. "A photo," Jessica said enthusiastically. This tart is a work of art, and I have to show it off." Mrs. Higgins laughed softly and took her own cell phone from her purse. "If that's the case, I want to take one too." Sarah blushed slightly, seeing the elderly woman position her phone and capture an image of the tart with great care. "What do you want the photo for?" she asked with curiosity. Mrs. Higgins smiled mischievously while typing on her cell phone. "I have a group chat with friends who, like me, can't eat sugar. I'm going to tell them about this marvel I was just gifted." Sarah opened her eyes with surprise. "Really?" Of course, Mrs. Higgins responded with enthusiasm. "We're always sharing food recommendations, but we never find something that actually tastes good." Jessica let out a loud laugh. "Get ready, Sarah. Fame is coming." Sarah laughed, thinking her friend was just exaggerating, but what she didn't know was that in that precise instant, her life was about to change forever. Sarah saw Mrs. Higgins leave the bakery with the tart in her hands and felt a wave of satisfaction in her chest. Seeing her smile full of gratitude had been enough to brighten the day. But she didn't expect that feeling to prolong beyond that moment. However, that night, while she was in her small apartment receiving the dim glow of the streetlight from the window, her cell phone vibrated on the table. She picked up the device without much interest, thinking it would be some unimportant message. But as soon as she read the sender, her heart gave a little skip. It was Mrs. Higgins. Her fingers tensed before unlocking the screen. "Child, I don't know how to thank you for what you did for me today. It wasn't just the tart, it was what it meant to me. Since I was diagnosed with diabetes, I thought I would never enjoy a dessert like the old days again. You can't imagine what I felt tasting it. I closed my eyes and for a moment I went back to being that young girl who walked into the pastry shop downtown on Sundays after church, buying a slice of fruit tart with cream, enjoying it without restrictions. Today I felt like that again. It was a gift. It was a miracle, and the most incredible thing is that you made it possible." Sarah felt a knot tighten her throat. But the message didn't end there. My friends were also amazed. They asked me to ask you if you could make 5 more tarts for next week. It would make me very happy to be able to share them with them. If you can't, I'll understand. Sarah squeezed the phone with both hands as if it were something fragile. Her eyes filled with tears she couldn't avoid. She had made hundreds, maybe thousands of cakes in her life, but she had never received a message like that. For the first time, someone told her that her work had made a difference in a person's life. She took a deep breath before writing her response. "Of course, Mrs. Higgins, I will gladly make more." But it didn't end there. As soon as she sent the message, more arrived. "Hi, Sarah. I'm a friend of Alba's. Could you make me a tart too? Good evening. Do you make other sugar-free desserts? My husband is diabetic and I'd love to surprise him. They told me you made an incredible sugar-free cake. Are you still taking orders?" Sarah put the cell phone on the table, unable to process what was happening. It wasn't just Mrs. Higgins. Other people wanted the same thing. She ran a hand over her face and let herself fall onto the armchair, feeling reality bending around her. Never in her life had she sold a cake on her own. She always worked under the recipes and rules of the bakery, always doing what others told her. But this was different. This was hers. And for the first time, the idea of creating something of her own stopped seeming like an impossible dream. The next morning, while kneading dough at the bakery, Jessica watched her with arms crossed and an amused expression on her face. "You look like you didn't sleep at all," she commented with a half smile. Sarah let out a sigh. "I didn't sleep much. Honestly. Let me guess, you spent the night thinking about the orders." Sarah stopped for an instant and looked at her. "They're asking for more tarts, Jess." "Many more." Jessica smiled with enthusiasm. "Well, of course, because you're a baking genius and people are finally noticing." Sarah left the dough on the table and rested her hands on her waist. "But I don't know if I can do it. I don't have enough space or equipment. I don't even know how to charge for them." Jessica rolled her eyes and gave her a slight shove on the shoulder. "Sarah, you have gold in your hands. You can't run from this anymore." "I'm not running," she protested. "I just don't know where to start." Jessica clicked her tongue. "Start by accepting the orders and seeing how far you can go. I'll help you with whatever you need." Sarah looked at her with a glimmer of hope. "Really?" "Of course," exclaimed Jessica. "But we need to get organized." She remained thoughtful for a moment, then snapped her fingers as if she had a revelation. "I know! We should make a social media page." Sarah arched her eyebrows. "A page?" "Yes, That way people will know where to place their orders and we can manage everything better. Sarah wasn't completely convinced. I don't know, Jess. I just wanted to give a gift to Mrs. Higgins. And you did, said Jessica, looking at her intensely. But now there are more people who want the same thing. Sarah lowered her gaze. The idea of having her own clientele, of doing something outside the bakery, was overwhelming. But at the same time, it excited her. Well, I guess we could try. Jessica smiled with satisfaction and took out her phone. All right, what do we call the page? She fell silent, thoughtful. She looked toward the bakery window and remembered Mrs. Higgins' smile. She remembered the emotion in her voice when she said that for a moment she had felt like she was in her youth again. Then, the answer came to her with total clarity. Sweet Salvation. Plays on the original salva. Jessica looked up with surprise. Sweet Salvation? Sarah nodded with a smile. Yes. If it weren't for her, I never would have started this. It saved me too. Jessica gave her a quick and excited hug. I love it. Sweet Salvation. It sounds elegant, it sounds special. Sarah felt warmth run through her chest. For the first time in a long time, she felt she was on the right path. While Jessica began creating the page on her phone, Sarah looked at the dough in front of her and began to imagine a future that until a few days ago she hadn't even considered possible. The night breeze brushed against Ethan's face while he rested his elbows on the balcony railing, gazing lost at the perfectly manicured gardens of the mansion. The illuminated pool reflected the starry sky and the immensity of the luxury surrounding him. In the distance, the sound of a fountain filled the silence with its constant and harmonious dripping. He had everything he always wanted, and yet something inside him was beginning to crack. The glass of wine rested in his hand, but he hadn't tasted it in a good while. He was supposed to be happy. This life was supposed to bring him satisfaction, fulfillment, pride. But the feeling of emptiness became more evident with each passing day. Since Chloe had taken him out of his old life and brought him into her world of luxury, parties, and excess, everything had been an exciting adventure. No more financial worries, no more anguish about paying rent or living on a budget. Here, he had everything served on a silver platter. But at what cost? Chloe had received him into her life as if he were just another accessory. An attractive man who fit well by her side at parties, someone she could show off, mold, exhibit, but she didn't see him as an equal. And Ethan didn't take long to realize that in this world, he would never stop being the guest, the outsider, the passenger. At first, he thought that with time Chloe would take him seriously. He strove to fit in, to adapt, to prove he could be at her level. But with every event he attended, with every gala dinner where they seated him among businessmen who looked at him with condescension, he realized he would never be part of this elite. He had no money of his own, no influential last name, no power. And in this world, without that, he was nobody. He exhaled slowly and took a sip of his wine. The bitter taste scratched his throat. Chloe had organized another of her exclusive gatherings that night. She hadn't invited him to join the conversation, but she hadn't told him to leave either. As always, she simply ignored him. He thought of Sarah. He didn't want to, but his mind betrayed him constantly. He remembered the way she looked at him when they were together, with admiration, with respect, with sincere love. Chloe, on the other hand, looked at him with possession, and now he noticed it more than ever. He sighed and left the glass on the railing. How did it come to this? Since he had made the decision to leave Sarah, he told himself he would never look back, that he wouldn't regret it, that this was his destiny. But lately, the idea of having made a mistake became more unbearable. The sound of laughter coming from inside pulled him out of his thoughts. He frowned and entered the mansion. Chloe was sitting on a velvet sofa with a glass of champagne in her hand and an amused smile on her lips. Beside her, a well-dressed man with polished shoes and perfectly combed hair was whispering something in her ear. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. Chloe was laughing with him, relaxed, with that sparkle in her eyes she used to have when something truly amused her. But he was no longer the reason for that laughter. Something dark and cold settled in his chest. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice more serious than he expected. Chloe looked up and, seeing him, arched an eyebrow with evident annoyance. "Ethan, darling, don't make a scene." The man beside her gave him a polite smile. "Julian Thorne," he introduced himself, extending a hand. Ethan ignored it. Who is he? Chloe took a sip of her champagne with total calm before answering. A lifelong friend. Ethan felt his jaw tense. Since when do friends whisper in your ear? Chloe let out a loud laugh. Don't be ridiculous. The rage bubbled inside him. Ridiculous? Chloe, what is happening here? She sighed as if she were dealing with a capricious child. Ethan, please, let's not start with these scenes. I just want an answer, and I just want to enjoy my night. Ethan felt his skin burn. He wasn't wrong. Something was happening. But the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was that Chloe didn't even try to hide it. Julian smiled and stood up, adjusting his suit with irritating calm. Chloe, dear, I think it's better if I leave you two alone. No need, Julian, she responded with an amused smile. Ethan already understands how things are. Ethan felt the blow of those words like a punch to the stomach. Understands how things are. That meant this wasn't new, that he had been blind for too long. Julian gave him a pat on the shoulder with condescension before leaving the room. Ethan didn't move. He remained nailed to the floor with rage accumulating in his chest like a poison burning his insides. When the door closed behind the man, Chloe sighed. She left her glass on the table and crossed her legs, looking at him with a mix of boredom and annoyance. Ethan, you're not a child. He clenched his fists. What does that mean? It means that if you expected exclusivity, you chose the wrong woman. The final blow. Ethan felt his head spin. Chloe, I left everything for you. She let out a dry laugh. That was your mistake. Chloe stood up and walked toward him with the same elegance and coldness as always. Listen, Ethan, I liked you because you were handsome, charming, and entertaining. But darling, you don't belong in this world. He swallowed hard. Does that mean you're leaving me? Chloe smiled, tilting her head. Not yet. But I will when I get bored. And with that, she turned and left the room, leaving him alone. Ethan stood there, feeling how everything he had built crumbled in a matter of minutes. He had exchanged everything for a fantasy. Sarah never imagined her life could change so quickly. Just a few weeks ago, she felt trapped in a gray routine, working long hours at the bakery, returning to her empty little apartment, and sleeping with the feeling that her life would never move forward. But now, every day seemed to bring something new. Every day more people asked for her sugar-free tarts. It all started with Mrs. Higgins and her group of friends, but then word of mouth did its work. People started talking. I tasted a sugar-free tart that made me remember my childhood. It doesn't taste like a diet dessert. It tastes like something someone prepared with love. For the first time in years, my mom could eat a cake without fear. Sarah read the messages with shining eyes, unable to believe all this was happening thanks to a simple gesture. She had spent so much time feeling that her work had no value, that what she did wasn't important, that now she struggled to process the impact she was having on other people. But with every message, with every new order, she began to realize something. She had underestimated her own talent. That afternoon, while kneading in the bakery, Jessica watched her attentively from the other side of the counter. When are you going to tell me? Sarah blinked without stopping her work on the dough. Tell you what? Jessica crossed her arms and looked at her with an amused smile. That you're starting to take this business seriously. Sarah let out a small laugh. It's not a business, Jess. I'm just helping some people. Jessica interrupted her, raising an eyebrow. Oh, yeah? And how many helps are you up to now? Sarah stopped for a moment and frowned. She hadn't even counted. She dusted the flour off her hands and took out her cell phone. She opened the customer messages and began making a mental list. 5 tarts for Mrs. Higgins and her friends. 3 orders from other clients in the group. 2 special orders for people she had never seen in her life. 4 more for next week. 15 tarts in total. Her heart gave a jump. Never in her life had she made so many cakes on her own. Jessica smiled, seeing her face of astonishment. Exactly. This isn't a favor anymore. It's a business. Sarah swallowed hard. I don't know, Jess. I don't have anything formal. I don't have a shop. I don't have equipment. I don't have money to invest. Jessica rested her elbows on the table and stared at her. And what's stopping you? Sarah remained silent. That was the question she had avoided asking herself for days. That night, when she arrived at her apartment, she felt different. Before, every time she walked through the door, the only thing she felt was an overwhelming emptiness. But this time, her small home felt alive. There were molds stacked on the table, flour on the floor, boxes of ingredients in the corner. A total mess. But it was her mess. It was proof that she was doing something that really mattered. She took off her coat, tied back her hair, and turned on the oven. There were more orders to deliver, and she couldn't disappoint anyone. With each week that passed, Sarah became more efficient. She learned to optimize her time, calculate quantities better, organize orders, but her kitchen remained too small. She could barely move between the molds and the trays. Her refrigerator was at capacity. She knew she couldn't go on like this for much longer. One day, while delivering an order at a downtown cafe, the coffee corner, the owner of the shop watched her with curiosity. He was a man in his 40s with a well-groomed beard and stylish glasses. "Are you Sarah Miller?" he asked with interest, assuming she kept her maiden name or reverted to it. Sarah nodded, surprised. "Yes." The man extended his hand with a smile. "Mark Dawson. I own this place. I've been hearing a lot about your tarts." Sarah felt the air leave her. "Really?" "Yes. Several customers have asked if we sell them here. I'd like to do a trial run." Sarah felt her pulse accelerate. "A trial?" Mark nodded. "Leave me some tarts to sell this week. If they work well, we can make a deal." Sarah felt her hands tremble. A deal with a coffee shop? Until now, she had only sold informally. But this was different. This was taking the next step. This meant her business was real. When Sarah returned to the bakery that afternoon, Jessica saw her arrive with eyes wide as saucers and trembling hands. "What's wrong with you? Did you see a ghost?" Sarah dropped into a chair and took a breath. "A cafe downtown wants to sell my tarts." Jessica blinked. "What?" "The owner asked me to leave some this week. If they sell well, he wants to make an agreement with me." Jessica stared at her for 2 seconds and then, without warning, shouted with excitement. "Sarah! This is incredible!" Sarah still couldn't believe it. "I don't know what to do." "What do you mean you don't know what to do? Obviously, you have to accept. But what if they don't sell? What if they don't like them? What if—" Jessica took her face in her hands firmly. "Sarah, listen to me closely. You are growing. This is what you wanted." Sarah swallowed saliva. Was this what she wanted? She looked at her hands, the hands that kneaded the dough, and found the answer. Yes. This was exactly what she wanted. That Thursday, when Mrs. Higgins arrived at the bakery, Sarah had already made her decision. They sat at a table, as they did every week, and the elderly woman looked at her with tenderness. "What are you thinking about, child?" Sarah took a deep breath and took Mrs. Higgins' hands in hers. "I'm going to do it. I'm going to take my tarts further." The elderly woman's eyes shone with emotion. "I knew you would." Sarah smiled. This was only the beginning. The sound of glass hitting marble rumbled in the immense and cold living room. Ethan slowly swirled the glass between his fingers, watching the whiskey move with the same indifference with which Chloe treated him lately. His reflection in the amber liquid returned a blurred, unrecognizable image. The clock on the mantel read 3:20 a.m. Chloe wasn't home. Again. He was tired. Tired of waiting. Tired of pretending he didn't see the obvious. Tired of being a spectator in his own life. The first time Chloe didn't come home on time, he told himself it was nothing. She's busy. She has commitments. The second time, he convinced himself he had no right to complain. I'm not her owner. I can't tell her what to do. The third time, he simply stopped asking. Why do it if Chloe responded with the same bored laugh? "Oh, Ethan, how old-fashioned you are. You don't need to know everything." A laugh that at first had seemed seductive and full of confidence now just seemed cruel. He ran a hand over his face and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His head hurt. But it wasn't just the alcohol. It was something deeper, something that had been rotting inside him for months, something he could no longer ignore. He left everything for this woman, and now he felt he had absolutely nothing. The sound of the door opening made him lift his head suddenly. His muscles tensed as the echo of Chloe's heels resonated in the silent house. She appeared in the doorway of the living room like a distant vision, wrapped in an elegant red silk dress that fit her like a second skin. She looked perfect, as always, as if the night were her stage and the world were designed to revolve around her. Ethan didn't move. She looked at him with a carefree smile and dropped her purse on the table. "Still awake?" It wasn't a question. She didn't care about the answer. Ethan slammed the glass down on the table harder than necessary. Where were you? Chloe took off her earrings as if she hadn't heard him. With friends. The knot in his chest tightened a little more. With Julian? She paused for an instant, long enough for him to know the question hadn't pleased her. But when she turned back to him, her expression was the same as always, a mix between impatience and amusement. And if I was? Ethan felt something inside him crack. It wasn't rage, it wasn't jealousy, it was humiliation. He stood up, feeling that the floor beneath his feet wasn't as firm as before. Are you cheating on me? Chloe sighed and approached him with an air of annoyance. Ethan, darling, don't be childish. Answer me. She looked at him with narrowed eyes. If I had something with Julian, what would change? Silence fell over them like a concrete slab. He felt a momentary vertigo, a sensation of freefall, because the answer was, in her words. Because what Chloe had just told him, with all her coldness and cynicism, was that it didn't matter. It didn't matter if she cheated on him or not, because he didn't matter. The emptiness in his chest turned into an abyss. Why are you doing this? He asked in a low voice. Chloe tilted her head and observed him with an almost compassionate smile. Ethan, did you really think this was going to last forever? He didn't know what to answer. Chloe sighed and ran a hand over his face gently, a gesture that used to drive him crazy. Now it just made him want to pull away. Don't look at me like that, she murmured. You know this was never serious. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. For me, it was. She smiled with feigned sadness. That was a mistake. The rage bubbled inside him. A mistake? Yes. I warned you from the beginning. Ethan, I don't do commitments. Then what was I to you? Chloe shrugged. A distraction. The hit was dry and direct. Chloe gave him one last look without any trace of regret and walked away with elegant steps toward the stairs. You can stay here as long as you need, she said before disappearing. But sooner or later, this ends. When he heard the door close upstairs, Ethan understood his time was up. The immense house felt emptier than ever. The walls that once seemed imposing and elegant now felt cold and oppressive. The furniture he once admired as symbols of wealth and status seemed foreign to him. The paintings, the lamps, the ornaments. Nothing belonged to him. He had no home, no money, no love. He let himself fall onto the sofa and buried his head in his hands. He had lost everything. But more than that, he had lost himself. He stood up suddenly and went to the bar. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey, but instead of pouring a drink, he threw it against the wall. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces. The golden liquid drained across the floor like a reflection of his own spilled life. Sarah stood in front of the coffee corner, fingers clenched around the straps of her bag and heart hammering in her chest. Through the large windows, she could see the constant movement inside the shop. Waiters walked with trays full of steaming coffee, customers chatted animatedly, and at the counter, right next to the croissants and butter cookies, were her tarts. It was the first time she saw her desserts displayed in a showcase that wasn't the bakery where she worked. It was the first time her name, her work, was making its way into the world of pastry without being under the shadow of another business. It was her first real chance to do something big. She took a deep breath. Are you going in, or are you going to stay spying from here like a stalker? Joked Jessica, standing beside her with crossed arms. Sarah shot her a nervous look. What if they didn't sell? Jessica huffed with impatience and gave her a slight push toward the door. Sarah, go in at once and find out. What's the worst that can happen? Sarah swallowed hard and, before thinking too much, pushed the door. The bell above the frame rang softly, announcing her entry. Immediately, the smell of freshly ground coffee enveloped her. It was a warm, welcoming aroma that calmed her a little. She took a step inside, and from the other side of the counter, the cafe owner, Mark Dawson, saw her and smiled broadly. Sarah, I was just about to call you. Her heart skipped a beat. Was that good or bad? She walked to the counter, stomach knotted with nerves. Hi, Mark. Just stopping by to see how it went with the tarts. Mark crossed his arms and looked at her with a calculating expression, as if enjoying seeing her sweat with anticipation. Let me see. He paused dramatically. You left us 5, right? Sarah nodded, feeling her breathing become shallower. Mark smiled sideways. Well, They all sold in 2 days. Sarah blinked. What did you say? Sold out, repeated Mark, amused. And fast. Faster than I imagined, actually. Sarah felt her body go completely still. Really? Jessica, who was right behind her, gave her an elbow to the ribs with a big smile on her face. See? I told you. Mark leaned his elbows on the counter and lowered his voice a bit, as if about to tell a secret. In fact, there were customers asking if we had more. One lady told me she hadn't enjoyed a dessert without guilt in years, and that your tart reminded her of the desserts her grandmother made when she was a child. They hadn't just sold. They had left an impression. So, I want to make you a formal offer, Mark continued. Sarah could barely think clearly. Offer? Yes. I want you to supply us with tarts every week. We can make a contract, agree on a fixed payment, and make your desserts an official part of the menu. The words floated in the air, heavy with weight. Sarah felt her entire world stop. A contract, a fixed payment, a stable business. It was real. What do you say? Asked Mark with an expectant expression. Fear began to twist inside Sarah. A part of her wanted to say no, that she wasn't ready yet, that she didn't have a big kitchen, that she didn't know how to handle this. But another part, knew this was her chance. She took a deep breath and, with her heart pounding in her chest, reached out her hand. I say yes. Mark shook her hand firmly. Welcome to the coffee corner. Sarah had just closed her first deal as an entrepreneur. That night, Sarah and Jessica celebrated in the small apartment. They didn't have elegant glasses or expensive wine, but they bought a cheap bottle at the corner store and poured it into water glasses as if they were the finest in the world. Jessica raised her glass. To sweet salvation. Sarah smiled, feeling her heart swell with emotion, and raised hers. To sweet salvation. They clinked glasses and drank. The cheap wine had a strong and slightly acidic taste, but in that moment, it tasted like victory. Jessica watched her with pride. You're about to be a businesswoman, friend. Sarah leaned her head against the back of the sofa and sighed. I'm not yet. But you will be, Jessica affirmed with conviction. So, what's next? Sarah remained silent for a moment. She knew the answer. I need a bigger place. Jessica nodded. Yeah. Your kitchen looks like a clandestine dessert factory. Both laughed, but Sarah was thinking seriously. She couldn't go on like this, cooking in a small space until dawn without professional equipment. She needed to take the next step. The next morning, she got moving. She knocked on doors, sent messages, asked acquaintances, searched the internet, walked streets, spoke to restaurant owners. Finally, after many attempts, a bakery downtown offered her their kitchen at night when they closed. It was a modest space, but it had industrial ovens and all the necessary equipment. It was perfect. Sarah signed an agreement with the owner, and that same night, she began working there. She had taken one more step toward her dream. Orders increased. Customers asked for more. The cafe sold her tarts faster and faster. And then, one day, Sarah received a message that would change everything. It was from one of the largest coffee chains in the city. Hello, we've heard about your tarts. We would like to test them on our menu. Sarah dropped the phone and covered her mouth with her hands, unable to believe it. Her business, born from a simple gesture of affection toward Mrs. Higgins, was now about to expand in a big way. The scorching sun beat down on the city, burning his skin as he walked aimlessly through the streets. His shirt, once impeccable and elegant, was now wrinkled and sticky with sweat. His leather shoes, which used to shine with every step, were dirty and covered in dust. He hadn't eaten anything since the morning before. Every step weighed on him as if dragging the burden of all his bad decisions, because, in reality, he was. 2 days earlier, Chloe had kicked him out of the mansion without a trace of remorse. She didn't even fake compassion. She simply looked at him from the staircase in her impeccable silk dress, a glass of wine in hand, as if dismissing a servant who had ceased to be useful. Ethan, she said in her usual lazy tone, I think enough time has passed. It's time for you to leave. The words pierced him like blades, but he didn't argue. There was nothing to argue about. Without saying a word, he took the small suitcase with the little he had left and walked out the door. He didn't look back, but that didn't mean he didn't feel the pain. Now he was there, wandering the city like a man with no past and no future. He had called the friends he made in Chloe's world the businessmen with whom he drank whiskey at exclusive events, the men who patted him on the back when he was Chloe Kensington's boyfriend. None answered. Those who did responded with coldness. "Ethan, I can't help you right now. I'm busy. Let's talk later. Sorry about what happened, but you know how these things go." The last call he made was to Julian, the new man in Chloe's life, the same one who had replaced him effortlessly. "Ethan? Why are you calling?" he said with a brazen laugh upon answering. "I need you to listen to me." "I don't think that's necessary," replied Julian with a tone of evident mockery. "Chloe told me you already spoke to her." Ethan felt his muscles tense. "Look, buddy, a piece of advice. Get over it. These things happen." And with that, the call ended. Ethan stared at his cell phone screen, heart pounding. That was the exact moment he understood he had nothing left. He ended up in a park, collapsing onto a bench with his head down and elbows on his knees. He took out his wallet and checked the little remaining cash. $20. He didn't even laugh. He had no strength left to mock himself. He looked around. The world kept turning as if nothing happening to him mattered. A group of kids played near the fountain, running with joy under the sun. Further away, an elderly couple shared an ice cream. Simple, everyday scenes, but Ethan realized how empty his life with Chloe had been. He had traded everything for a world of luxury and appearances and had ended up with absolutely nothing. He didn't know how much time he spent there, staring at nothing, until his body moved by inertia. Without realizing it, he had ended up on a familiar street. He stopped on the sidewalk and looked up. The bakery. The place where Sarah worked. His heart shrank. The sign above the door remained the same. The smell of fresh bread floated in the air, wrapping him in a wave of memories. Sarah, her hair in a messy bun, her warm smile, the way she made him coffee in the mornings, the way she loved him without expecting anything in return. He closed his eyes tightly, feeling a pang in his chest. What had become of her? Would she still be here, working in the same place? Would she still think of him? He took a breath and crossed the street. He pushed the door cautiously, and the bell rang softly upon entering. The familiar aroma hit him immediately. Flour, coffee, vanilla. His eyes scanned the place looking for Sarah, but she wasn't behind the counter. Instead, there was a robust man with a gray mustache. When he looked up and recognized him, his expression went from surprise to mockery in seconds. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "Well, well," said the man, crossing his arms. "Look who's back." Ethan swallowed hard. "I need to know something." "Oh yeah? And what could be so important?" "Sarah." The man let out a low laugh and looked at him with disbelief. "Sarah? You have the nerve to come asking for her?" Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "Does she still work here?" Mr. Miller let out a dry laugh. "Sarah? Here?" He shook his head incredulously. "Tell me something, Ethan. How long has it been since you've seen her?" Ethan felt pressure in his chest. "More than a year." The man smiled with amusement. "So you have no idea about anything, do you?" Ethan felt the air becoming heavier. "What do you mean?" Mr. Miller wiped his hands with a cloth and leaned his elbows on the counter, leaning in a little. "I'm going to enjoy telling you this." He took a moment to savor it and then dropped the news. "Sarah hasn't worked here in a long time." Ethan frowned. "Then where is she?" The owner laughed again. "Where is she?" He looked at him with malicious amusement. "Oh, friend, you're in for a surprise." Ethan felt a chill crawl over his skin. Destiny, the one he always believed he controlled, was about to prove he had no control over anything. For the first time in his life, he was afraid of the answer. The air in the bakery became thick, as if suddenly all the oxygen had disappeared. Ethan felt a tingling in the back of his neck, a pressure in his chest. He had entered expecting to see Sarah behind the counter, maybe with flour-dusted cheeks and that sweet look he remembered. Mr. Miller continued looking at him with a triumphant smile. "What do you mean I'm in for a surprise?" asked Ethan with a furrowed brow, although inside he felt something in him breaking slowly. The man crossed his arms and tilted his head with a thoughtful air, enjoying every second of his discomfort. "Let me ask you something, Ethan." His voice was deliberate, almost mocking. "When you left Sarah, when you kicked her out of the home you shared without caring what happened to her, did you really think she was going to stay here?" Ethan felt a shiver. He didn't answer. He had never stopped to think about it. In his mind, she just stayed behind, trapped in the same routine, never daring to do anything beyond kneading bread. But now, something told him he was very wrong. Mr. Miller snorted with a dry laugh and shook his head. "I knew it," he said with disdain. "You didn't think of her for a single second." Ethan felt an oppression in his chest. The man turned and took something from a nearby shelf. Then, with a sharp slap, he dropped a newspaper, or perhaps a tablet showing a news article, on the counter. "Here. I think this will answer your question." Ethan frowned and, with trembling hands, took the paper, device. His eyes met a large photo in the business section. It was Sarah. But not the Sarah he remembered. She wore a pristine white chef's coat with gold details on the cuffs and her name embroidered in silver thread. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her smile reflected a confidence Ethan had never seen in her. Below the photo, a headline in large letters captured his attention like a punch to the chest. "Sweet Salvation. The baker, revolutionizing the healthy dessert market." His head spun. He lowered his gaze and read the first paragraphs of the article with difficulty. Sarah Miller began baking tarts in her small apartment with the intention of helping a friend. Today, Sweet Salvation has become one of the most recognized brands in healthy pastry, with expansion plans and multiple contracts with gourmet cafes and restaurants. Every word pierced him like a blade. Sarah had her own company. Sarah had achieved what he always dreamed for himself. Mr. Miller crossed his arms and smiled with satisfaction. Not bad for someone who, according to you, had no ambition, right? Ethan felt a bitter taste rise in his throat. His mind dragged him to memories he had tried to bury. He remembered the night he packed his bags and told Sarah she would never change. "You have no vision, Sarah. You're never going to be more than a simple baker." He remembered the way her eyes filled with tears. "I don't need to be rich to be happy." At that moment, it seemed like a pathetic answer. But now, looking at her in the paper, he understood she was never the mediocre one in the relationship. The mediocre one had been him, and now he was paying the price. "Where is she now?" he asked with a raspy voice, not looking up from the article. Mr. Miller let out a laugh. "You want to see her?" Ethan nodded slowly, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his ears. The man took out his cell phone, swiped the screen, and showed it to him. It was an ad for a grand opening. Grand opening, Sweet Salvation, new downtown location. Under the title in smaller letters was a detail that finished crushing him. With the presence of founder Sarah Miller, the air seemed to disappear from his lungs. She didn't just have a business, she was expanding. "It's tonight," said Mr. Miller, taking his phone back. "Maybe you should go, although I doubt Sarah wants to see you." Ethan felt his legs weaken. The destiny that had smiled at him so many times was now hitting him without mercy. While he had fallen to the bottom, Sarah had risen to heights he never imagined. The sky over the city turned a melancholic gray while Ethan wandered aimlessly through the streets. His mind was clouded. He advanced by inertia, but his head still spun with the information he just received. Sarah Miller, his Sarah, she was no longer the same. She wasn't the submissive woman he left behind. She wasn't the conformist girl who, in his mind, would never go far. Now she was a successful businesswoman known nationwide. While he crawled in misery, she had ascended. He stopped at a corner, leaning his back against a building wall. He felt like he couldn't breathe. Since leaving the bakery, he hadn't stopped reliving every moment with Sarah in his mind. Every time he made her feel small. Every time he ignored her while she spoke with excitement about her pastries. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to order his thoughts. He needed answers. He took out his cell phone with trembling hands and typed her name into the search bar. Sarah Miller, Sweet Salvation. Results appeared immediately. Articles, interviews, reports on her success. Dozens of pages spoke of her talent, of how she built an empire from nothing. He swiped the screen until he found a video of a recent interview. The title caused chills. Sarah Miller, the story of struggle and success behind Sweet Salvation. He hesitated before pressing play. "Welcome, Sarah. It's a pleasure to have you here," the host's voice resonated in his ears. The screen showed Sarah settling onto an elegant studio sofa. She wore an impeccable pastel suit. She looked secure, serene. "Thank you for the invitation," Sarah responded with a professional smile. Ethan struggled to recognize her. "Sarah, your story has inspired many people. Just a few years ago, No one knew your name, and now you run one of the most successful, healthy pastry brands in the country. Tell us, how did it all start?" Sarah lowered her gaze for a moment, as if reliving the past. Then she took a deep breath. "My story didn't start with success. On the contrary, it started with a fall." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "A few years ago, I lost everything." Images of her first days flashed on the screen, her small apartment, her first tart in a simple box. "I found myself alone, without money, without a home." Ethan's stomach churned. He knew she was talking about him. But what Sarah said next left him breathless. "And the hardest part is that I also lost my baby." Ethan felt his entire body freeze. "What?" The screen showed Sarah with a serene expression, but her eyes reflected the weight of that pain. "I didn't know at first," she continued. "I was so overwhelmed by sadness, by stress, that I didn't realize I was pregnant." The air disappeared from Ethan's lungs. "God," he whispered, vision blurring. "But I didn't have time to process it," Sarah went on. "My body couldn't handle the tension, and I lost it." The host looked at her with sadness. "That must have been devastating." Sarah nodded with a small smile full of melancholy. "It was." Ethan felt his legs give way and had to lean against a lamppost. Sarah had been pregnant, and he never knew. His child. A tremor ran through his body. He thought the worst thing he had done was leave her broke and homeless, but now he understood he had left her at the most vulnerable moment of her life. And as if destiny wanted to ensure he understood completely, an image on a giant screen across the street hit him harder than any word. A billboard with Sarah's image and the Sweet Salvation logo. Beneath it, a slogan in gold letters, transforming pain into sweetness, the past into success, and wounds into strength. Sarah hadn't just gotten over it. She had turned her worst suffering into fuel for her success. And he was nothing more than a ghost in her history. The weight of the truth continued to oppress Ethan's chest as he walked away from the avenue. The pain was unbearable. He remembered all the times he ignored her. Not only had he lost Sarah, but he had lost a child he never knew. A family he didn't even know he could have had. His stomach turned with a pang of anguish. He hadn't eaten all day, and hunger mixed with exhaustion caused unbearable dizziness. He looked for a place to sit, and found a lonely bench in the central plaza. He let himself fall onto it and buried his face in his hands. He had nowhere to go, no money, no friends. He couldn't stay on the street. He had to find a way to survive. The next few hours were an ordeal. With the little dignity he had left, Ethan scoured streets looking for work. He entered cafes, small diners, bakeries, any place that might need someone. But his appearance didn't help. Wrinkled clothes, sunken eyes, messy beard. "Sorry, we're fully staffed. Leave your number." He knew they wouldn't call. He kept walking, stomach growling, desperation tightening his chest. When he passed an elegant restaurant with large windows and warm lights, he stopped. The Golden Oak Bistro. Waiters moved back and forth with trays. Well-dressed clients chatted. It wasn't long ago he was one of those clients. Now he was outside looking in like a stranger. He was about to keep walking when he saw a sign taped to the side entrance. "Assistant manager wanted. Experience required." His heart gave a small jump. He could do that. He had experience managing a high-end spa. It was a job far below what he used to have, but it was an opportunity. Without thinking too much, he entered. The interior was sophisticated. He asked for the manager. Minutes later, a tall man with gray hair appeared. "Good evening. How can I help you?" asked the manager with a polite but distant tone. Ethan swallowed saliva and forced himself to speak with confidence. "I saw the sign outside. I'm interested in the assistant manager position. I have experience in administration and customer service." The man looked him up and down. "Where did you work before?" "I was a manager at a high-level spa for several years." The man raised an eyebrow. "Why did you leave?" Ethan felt his throat dry. He couldn't tell the truth. "Personal circumstances," he replied without details. The manager studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. "We can do a 1-week trial. If it works, you stay." Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of relief and shame. He had a job, but it was basically a waiter, supervisor role. "You start tomorrow," said the manager. "Be punctual." Ethan walked out with a strange feeling. It wasn't happiness. It was acceptance. Destiny was forcing him to start from the bottom. The sound of silverware hitting plates, the conversations, and the fast pace of the restaurant formed the scenario of his new life. For Ethan, every minute felt like a reminder of how far he had fallen. 2 weeks ago, he slept in Egyptian cotton sheets. Now he wore a uniform that didn't belong to him, taking orders instead of giving them. And although the blow to his pride was enough, destiny had something else prepared. He was organizing orders in the kitchen when a waitress left a menu on the counter. He picked it up to check the specials, never imagining that a simple glance would make him feel like the floor was opening up. Dessert of the day, sugar-free chocolate tart, exclusive recipe from Sweet Salvation. The air stuck in his lungs. He read the line again. There it was, printed in black ink, Sarah's name. His mouth went dry. "Everything okay?" asked a waiter beside him. Ethan blinked. Yeah, he murmured, putting the menu down quickly. But his mind couldn't escape the weight of the truth. Not only had she succeeded without him, but destiny had decided to force him to live under her shadow. Every day he worked here, he would have to see her success reflected in every dessert served. The clock struck 9 p.m. when the restaurant manager entered the kitchen, serious and firm. "Tomorrow we have a special event," he announced. "A private dinner with VIP guests. I want the staff to be impeccable. A major supplier is coming. It will be one of the biggest presentations of the year." Ethan listened halfway until the manager mentioned something that pulled him out of his trance. "Sarah Miller, the owner of Sweet Salvation, will be present." Ethan's stomach sank. He felt his blood freeze. "She has been a great ally for this restaurant," continued the manager. "She's a woman with vision. So when she arrives, I want her treated with maximum courtesy and respect." The floor seemed to disappear. Sarah was coming here tomorrow, to the place where he worked as a simple assistant, clearing tables. The man who once told her she would never be more than a baker without ambition would now have to see her enter as a powerful, respected businesswoman. And he was nothing more than an insignificant employee in the shadow of her success. The restaurant shone with the elegance of a special night. For most guests, it was just another gala. For Ethan, it was a sentence. He spent the afternoon in uncontrollable anxiety. He knew she would arrive at any moment. He tried to convince himself he could avoid her, stay out of sight. But a part of him knew the encounter was inevitable. And then, the door opened. He didn't need to look to know it was her. The air seemed to change. Ethan looked up, and the impact was brutal. Sarah stood at the entrance, radiating a security that left him breathless. She wore an elegant black dress, simple but sophisticated. Her hair fell in waves. There was no trace of the woman he abandoned. This was someone completely different. The manager rushed to greet her. "Miss Miller, what a pleasure to have you here." "Thank you. I'm glad to be here," she replied with kindness. "Congratulations on the expansion of Sweet Salvation. It's incredible what you've achieved." Expansion, franchises. Ethan felt his body tense. He wanted to run, but it was too late. Sarah turned her head, scanning the room, and their eyes met. The air became heavy. Time seemed to stop. Ethan waited for a reaction, anger, surprise, but there was nothing. Sarah looked at him with the same serenity she would look at anyone else. No hesitation, no nostalgia. That was the worst punishment. She took a couple of steps in his direction with confidence. Ethan felt his legs heavy. When she was in front of him, she observed him with a slight tilt of her head. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" she asked with absolute calm. He swallowed dry. "I work here," he admitted in a low voice, shame crushing him. Sarah didn't react immediately. Ethan felt he had to say something. Before fear paralyzed him, he was honest. "Sarah, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know I can't change the past." She didn't look away. "You were the only person who truly loved me, and I failed you." Sarah's eyes didn't show weakness. "For years I thought I made the best decision. But I was wrong. I would give everything I have to go back and make things right." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, a shadow of the past. But when she opened them, her gaze was firm. "Too late, Ethan." He felt his heart flip. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." His voice broke. "The baby. I didn't know." She looked down for an instant. "No. You didn't know. Forgive me," he whispered. "For everything. Sarah looked at him intently. A whirlwind of memories passed between them. Then, she smiled. Not a mocking smile, but a serene one. You know, Ethan? For a long time, I asked myself why you did this to me. I tormented myself. But now I see it clearly. She took a glass of champagne from a nearby table. If you hadn't been so selfish and cruel, I never would have changed my life. She raised the glass in a toast. So, thank you, Ethan. She took a sip with grace and, without waiting for an answer, turned and walked back to her table. Ethan felt his chest empty completely. He wasn't even worthy of her resentment. "Everything okay, Ethan?" asked a fellow waiter. "No, nothing," he muttered. He needed to disappear. But just as he tried to lose himself among the tables, a murmur filled the room. Ethan turned. Alexander Sterling had just entered. The imposing businessman walked with the security of a man who knows exactly what he's worth. Tall, elegant, a supermarket tycoon. Alexander made his way to Sarah, carrying an exquisite bouquet of flowers. Ethan felt a chill. Alexander extended the bouquet to Sarah and whispered something in her ear that made her laugh softly before leaning in to receive a kiss on the lips. Ethan felt his stomach shrink. She hadn't just succeeded, she had found something much better. "Do you know who he is?" asked the manager, appearing beside him. "Him?" Ethan asked, voice raspy. "Alexander Sterling, one of the richest men in the grocery industry, a man of power and influence, and apparently the man who has Sarah Miller's heart." Ethan felt his legs wobble. Not only was Sarah a success, but she was with a man who was everything Ethan could never be. He closed his eyes, feeling unbearable pressure. He wanted to scream, cry, curse his own stupidity, but he did nothing. He had no right. He clenched his jaw and, with a barely audible voice, murmured, "Destiny really taught me an unforgettable lesson." If you liked this ending, give us a like and support us to keep bringing you more impactful stories. Do you think Ethan deserved another chance, or did destiny do justice? Leave it in the comments. Share this with someone who needs a life lesson. And don't go yet, click the screen now to keep enjoying our stories.